like whispers in the dark. Tonight, I am going to tell you what happened in that old colonial mansion, the one my husband John laughed about when I said it felt haunted. I shall tell it as I lived it, as I breathed it, as I watched the walls breathe with me. Perhaps you will think me nervous. Perhaps you will think me ill. John thought so. Dear John, practical John, physician John, who loved me so sensibly that he nearly loved me into the grave. It is very seldom that ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, there was something strange about the place from the beginning. I felt it when the carriage turned beneath the long avenue of black trees, whose branches knitted together overhead like the ribs of some enormous buried beast. The house appeared slowly through the leaves, pale and broad and watchful, with windows that caught the sunset, and turned it into a row of red eyes. John said the rent was cheap because the place had stood empty so long. He said the air was excellent, the grounds secluded, and the distance from town just far enough to keep visitors from tiring me. He said everything in that kind, firm tone that made contradiction seem like childish ingratitude. I had been unwell after the birth of our baby. That is what everyone said. A temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency. Nothing dangerous, nothing worth nomming too gravely. I knew I was not right, but I also knew there was more in me than nerves. There were thoughts, countless thoughts, thoughts that pressed at the inside of my skull and asked to be written, thoughts that fluttered like moths against a candle flame. But John said writing was the worst possible thing for me. He said imagination was the enemy. He said I must have absolute rest. So I was brought to the house, away from society, away from stimulation, away from my little baby except for brief visits, for the child made me nervous, though I loved him more than life. Mary was very good with the baby. Mary had a soft manner and a wide, blank face that never betrayed judgment. She carried him about in the lower rooms and sometimes through the garden, and I watched from above like a ghost watching the living. Jenny came too, John's sister, a perfect housekeeper, brisk and cheerful and efficient, with a way of turning every room she entered into something proper. She believed John utterly. Everyone did. When he told them I needed quiet, they lowered their voices. When he told them I must not write, they removed my pen and paper. When he told them I was improving, they smiled with relief and did not look at me closely enough to see that I was vanishing. The house itself was beautiful in the way of things that have been dead for a long time. There were shaded lanes, green houses with broken glass, a garden whose box borders had grown wild, and little arbors smothered in roses. I should have liked one of the rooms downstairs, with chintz curtains and a view of the garden. There was one room opening onto the piazza that had roses all around the windows, and I begged John to let us take it. But John would not hear of it. He chose the nursery at the top of the house. It was a big, airy room, he said. Plenty of sunshine. Windows facing every direction. room enough for my bed, and for John's when he stayed with me, and space for me to walk about when I felt restless. It had once been a nursery, then a playroom, then perhaps a schoolroom, though I could never decide which history clung most tightly to it. The windows were barred for little children, John explained. The bed was nailed down so that children could not move it in their games. The floor was scratched and gouged. The plaster was torn in places. There were rings and things in the walls. I did not like it at all. The first thing I noticed was the wallpaper. I have never seen a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. The color was repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. In some places, it was a dull orange, in others a sickly sulfur, in others the pale color of old bone left under wet leaves. The pattern lurched and bulged and crawled. It was not arranged, not truly. At first glance one saw curves, flourishes, uncertain blossoms, bulbous shapes like fungi, and long broken lines that suddenly seemed to strangle themselves. Looked at one way, the pattern appeared to climb. Looked at another, it sank. If followed too closely, it committed a kind of optical violence, slapping the eye, confusing the mind, leaving one angry and exhausted. I said to John that I could not sleep in that room. He laughed. "You know the place is doing you good," he said. "And really, dear, the paper is ugly, but you must not let such a little thing get hold of you." A little thing. I turned my face away, so he would not see my tears. He took me in his arms and called me his blessed little goose. He said if we changed rooms, I would find something else to dislike, and the indulgence of fancies was precisely what he wished to avoid. He said the very worst thing for me was to give way to imaginative power. He spoke of phosphates and tonics, of air and exercise, of scheduled sleep. He kissed my forehead as if sealing a prescription there. I did try to be good. I truly did. I lay down after each meal. I walked in the garden when told. I ate beef tea and took cod liver oil until my mouth tasted perpetually of grease and iron. I saw no one unless John approved. I held my baby when I could bear it, but often I trembled so much that Mary took him away, and I heard his thin cry float up the stairwell after me like an accusation. In secret, I wrote, only a little at a time. It tired me to be sly. I would listen for Jenny's step in the hall, for John's measured tread on the stairs, then pull my hidden paper from beneath the mattress and scratch a few lines. It relieved me. It made me feel for a moment as if I existed outside of being watched and corrected. But I had to hide the pages quickly, for John hated to find me writing. He did not scold harshly. That would have been easier. He looked wounded. He looked as though my disobedience proved the severity of my condition. At first, I wrote about the garden, about the delicious smell of the roses after rain, about the long grape-covered arbors and the abandoned fountain, whose basin was choked with dark weeds. Then I wrote about the house. Then about the wallpaper. It occupied my mind more than I wished to admit. By daylight, when the sun poured in too strongly and made everything flat, I could almost laugh at it. The paper was merely hideous. It had been stripped in great patches, especially near the head of the bed, as if children had torn at it in mischief. A large piece had been ripped away low down near the floor, and there the wall beneath was exposed, gray and damp looking. The paper was scratched in long streaks around the room, all at the same height, as though some heavy thing had been dragged there again and again. There were places where the yellow surface had been rubbed thin and shining, like skin worn raw. The smell came later. At least, I noticed it later. It was not strong in the beginning. A faint yellow smell, if smell may be given color. A damp, sour, lingering odor that suggested old cloth left shut in a trunk with something once alive. It crept into my hair. It lay on my pillow. It followed me into the hall, down the stairs, even into the garden. On wet mornings it was strongest, and I would wake with my tongue coated in it, as though I had been made to swallow the wallpaper in my sleep. I complained of it to John. He said old houses always smelled. He told Jenny to open the windows wider, but the bars were fixed, and the air did not move properly through that room. It circled. It stirred the wallpaper very faintly in the corners, though John insisted there was no draft. Nights were worst. John slept heavily when he stayed with me, one arm flung across his chest, his beard lifting and settling with his breath. I lay awake beside him and watched moonlight change the paper. By day, the pattern was confusion. By moonlight, there was order of a sort, though it was an order no sane mind would wish to comprehend. A second pattern appeared behind the first, dim and uncertain, like a shape seen underwater. The front pattern became bars, twisted bars, swollen and broken, but bars all the same. Behind them, something moved. At first, I thought it was the shadow of a tree outside. But the trees did not reach so high, and the shadow did not correspond to any wind. It stooped, then lifted itself, then dragged sideways behind the yellow pattern. I held my breath, and it became still. I breathed again, and it crept. The next morning, I told myself I had been dreaming. That is what they wanted me to say, so I said it to myself. A dream, a nervous fancy, a trick of moonlight. But that night, and the next, and the next, the shape returned. It was not always in the same place. Sometimes it crouched low near the skirting board where the paper had been torn. Sometimes it was high above the bed, flattened across the wall like a woman pressed under glass. Sometimes there seemed to be more than one, pale shoulders and long arms and bent heads, all trapped behind the pattern, all shaking it faintly as if trying to get out. I began to watch by daylight more carefully. That was when I saw that the paper was not merely torn. It had been attacked. There were teeth marks in one corner. I know how that sounds. I know John would have smiled with his kind, superior patience and said, "My darling, you must not dwell on such things." But they were teeth marks. Human teeth, small and desperate, set deep into the softened paper near the floor. The yellow surface there was shredded, and in the deepest gouges there were dark stains that had sunk into the plaster. rust, not damp. I knew blood when I saw it, even old blood, dried brown as tea leaves. When I touched it, the stain flaked beneath my finger. I hid my hand when Jenny came in. She was dusting, humming softly, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She had good, strong arms. I envied her, those arms, her simple body that seemed to belong to her and obey her. She saw me looking at the wall and pursed her lips. "It is a horrid paper," she said. "I do not blame you for disliking it." I was so startled by this agreement that I nearly wept. "Then you do see it," I whispered. "See what?" "The woman." Jenny turned slowly. For one instant, something passed over her face. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Then it was gone, tucked away behind cheerful domestic certainty. "You are overtired," she said. "You must lie down before John returns." I caught her wrist. "Has anyone else slept here?" "In a house this old, dear. Many people have slept everywhere. In this room." She looked at my hand until I let go. I could not say, but she could say. I knew she could. Later that afternoon, while she was in the garden with Mary and the baby, I searched the room. I searched like a criminal. My heart beat hard enough to hurt. I looked beneath the mattress, behind the nailed bed, inside the wardrobe where dust hung in gray strings. I found nothing at first but dead moths and a child's wooden button. Then, in a crack between two floorboards near the west wall, I saw a strip of something folded tight. It was paper, brittle and yellowed, but not the wallpaper. A page from a journal, perhaps. The writing was faded. Much had been lost to damp and insects, yet I could make out a few lines. "He says the rest cure shall steady me." Then below it, "The child cries, and they bring him away." Then, "There is a woman under the paper. She knows my name." The last line had been written so deeply that the pen had torn through. "She is wearing my face." I hid the fragment in my bodice and could not eat supper. John was displeased. He sat across from me in the dining room, cutting his meat with precise little motions. The room smelled of silver polish and boiled mutton. Candles trembled in their sticks. Jenny poured coffee. Mary stood near the door with the baby asleep against her shoulder, his little mouth open, his breath sweet and milky. "You are losing ground, my dear," John said. "I am not," I replied too quickly. He looked at me over his spectacles. "You are pale. You are agitated. You have been giving way to fancies again. I only dislike the room." Again the room. "The paper is not wholesome. The paper is paper." His voice sharpened just enough that everyone noticed. Mary lowered her eyes. Jenny became very interested in the coffee service. I wanted to say that there had been another woman here, perhaps more than one. I wanted to lay the fragment before him, to make him read the words. But I already knew what he would do. He would take it from me. He would call it proof that I must not write. He would say someone else's nervous disorder had infected my imagination. So I bowed my head and apologized. John softened at once. He came around the table and kissed my hair. "There is my good girl," he said. "Trust me. I am a doctor and your husband besides. I know what is best for you." I looked at the baby over his shoulder. His tiny hand had curled around Mary's collar. His nails were translucent, perfect, delicate as shells. A terror entered me, then so sharp it felt like prophecy. I imagined those nails grown, long, and torn. I imagined him in that room years hence, married perhaps, smiling with his father's gentle authority as he locked some other woman inside the kindness of his judgment. I slept alone that night because John had been called away to a patient in town. Jenny offered to stay with me, but I pretended to be better. I even laughed. I wanted to watch the paper without witnesses. The moon rose late. Before it came, the room was dark in layers. The smell was stronger than ever. It seemed to seep from the walls in warm pulses. I sat in bed with my shawl around me and waited. The furniture gathered itself into shapes. The barred windows gleamed faintly. A beetle clicked somewhere in the plaster. Then the moonlight touched the wall. The pattern woke. I do not mean that fancifully. It woke as a sleeper wakes, first with a shiver, then a stretch. The top pattern lifted from the wall in places, not visibly enough that John would have admitted it, but enough that shadows slid beneath it. The bulbous curves swelled and contracted. The long lines tightened like cords. Behind them, the woman rose on her hands and knees. She was clearer than before. Her hair hung forward in dark strings. Her night dress clung to her as if wet. She moved with dreadful effort, as though every inch of the wallpaper resisted her, clinging to her elbows, her shoulders, the bones of her spine. She pressed her face against the bars of the pattern, and though I could not see her features distinctly, I felt her looking at me. Then she began to shake the pattern. The whole wall trembled, not loudly. It made a soft, papery sound, like hundreds of dry hands rubbing together. The strips near the bed rustled. The torn corners lifted and fell. I clutched the sheets. The woman shook harder. Her head jerked from side to side. There was something wrong with her neck. It bent too far. The paper held her by the throat. I whispered, "Who are you?" The shaking stopped. Her face came closer. The front pattern lay across it, making bars over her eyes and mouth. She opened her lips. Something black moved inside. From the wall came a voice, thin and papery. "Who were you?" I do not remember fainting. I remember waking on the floor with dawn lying gray across the room and blood in my mouth where I had bitten my tongue. The wall was still. John stood over me, his face grave. Jenny hovered behind him. "My darling," he said, "this cannot go on." I tried to tell him. I truly did. But the words tangled. The woman, the paper, the voice, the fragment. My tongue was swollen. My mouth tasted of copper. John lifted me as if I were a child and placed me in bed. "We shall double the rest," he said. "No more walking alone. No more secrets. You must conquer this, and I shall help you." He searched the room while Jenny watched me. I had hidden the fragment under my pillow, but in my sleep or in my fall, it must have slipped out. John found it. His face changed, only for a moment. The stern doctor disappeared, and something frightened looked out through his eyes. He read the lines. He folded the paper. He placed it in his pocket. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing. It belonged to her." "To whom?" "The woman before me." "No woman is before you," he said. But he would not meet my eyes. That evening I heard him and Jenny speaking in the hall. They thought I slept. "She found it," Jenny whispered. "I destroyed the rest years ago," John said. "Years ago." My breath stopped. "She must have brought it with her," Jenny said. But she did not sound convinced. "Nonsense. John, I told you this room was a mistake. And I told you not to speak of that." She bit through her own wrist. "Enough." She tore the paper for 3 nights. "You were the one who said the marks looked like fingernails." "Enough, Jenny." She said there were women in the wall. Their voices dropped. I crept from the bed, careful not to make the floorboards cry out, and pressed my ear against the door. The wood was cold. John said, "My wife is suggestible. If she hears one word of that sad history, it will fasten upon her mind. We leave at the end of the week. Until then, she must be watched." "At the end of the week," Jenny repeated. "Can she last that long?" I nearly laughed then. Can she last? As if I were meat in a larder, as if the room were weather. John went on. "I have written to Dr. Mitchell. If she does not improve, I shall take her to him in the autumn." Dr. Mitchell. The name struck me with a coldness deeper than fear. Another doctor, another authority, another man to teach me not to think, not to write, not to be. I returned to bed before they entered, but sleep did not come. The paper knew I knew. From that night onward, it no longer pretended to be merely ugly. It showed me things. In the morning light, the pattern resembled eyes. Not whole eyes, only suggestions of them. Lids without lashes. Pupils formed from accidental stains. They gathered in the curves and watched me as I dressed, as I ate, as I sat obediently by the window, pretending not to think. By afternoon, the yellow became brighter, almost wet. It gleamed in streaks. I began to see handprints where no handprints had been before. Some were small, perhaps a child. Some were long and narrow. Some dragged downward, leaving trails. Once I woke from a nap to find a fingernail on the coverlet. Not mine, not Jenny's. It was too thick, yellowed and split, with a rim of dark flesh still attached. I stared at it until the room tipped. Then the wallpaper gave a little sigh. I wrapped the nail in a scrap of cloth and hid it in the hollow bedpost where I had loosened a bit of wood. Later, it was gone. Another time, as twilight thickened, I saw the woman's fingers push through a torn place near the floor. Only the tips at first. Gray, wrinkled from damp, the nails broken to the quick. They felt about blindly, scraping the skirting board. I could not move. The fingers pressed harder. The tear widened. A smell rushed out, so foul and intimate that I gagged. was the smell of a closed mouth, of sickness under blankets, of rot sweetened by perfume. The fingers hooked into the carpet and pulled. I screamed then. John came running. Jenny came. Mary came with the baby crying in her arms. The wall was smooth, except for the old tear. John gave me laudanum that night. I pretended to swallow it, but let it pool beneath my tongue until he turned away, then spat it into the handkerchief hidden in my sleeve. I could not afford to sleep too deeply. The woman was strongest when I slept. She entered my dreams and walked through them, leaving yellow footprints. In one dream, I saw the nursery as it had been before. Children's toys lay scattered across the floor, but they were wrong. A doll with no face, a hoop bent into an oval too narrow for play, a little wooden horse whose mouth had been carved open in a scream. A woman sat in the nailed bed, writing in a journal. Her hair was brown and glossy. Her eyes were ringed with shadows. A man stood over her, not John, but like John in manner, kind, reasonable, smiling as one smiles at a beloved pet that has soiled the rug. "You must not write," he said. She tucked the journal beneath her skirts. The man looked toward the wall. "She listens when you write," he said. The woman began to tremble. Then the wallpaper split from ceiling to floor, and countless arms came through. They did not seize her all at once. That would have been merciful. They stroked her hair. They patted her cheeks. They pressed their fingers to her lips, bidding silence. Then one hand, slick and yellow, slid into her mouth and hooked behind her teeth. Another entered beneath her eyelid. Another gripped her wrist. The woman tried to scream, but the hands pulled her sound out of her throat like a long red ribbon. When I woke, my pillow was wet, not with tears. A yellow stain had spread beneath my cheek, and in it were tiny black specks that moved. I scrubbed my face until the skin burned. By then, I had begun to understand that the woman behind the paper was not one woman. She was all of them. The first wife who had been sent here to be quiet. The young mother who could not stop weeping. The girl who bit the wall. The nameless, nervous patience of fathers, husbands, brothers, doctors. Every woman flattened under instruction, folded into obedience, pressed behind the pattern until she lost her own outline. And now she wanted mine. Yet I pitied her. That was the most dreadful part. When the moonlight came and she crawled behind the bars, I no longer felt only fear. I felt fellowship. Her movements were grotesque because the paper had made them so. Her hands were ruined because she had clawed for air. Her voice was thin because no one had listened when it was whole. "Let me out," she whispered. Sometimes she said it aloud. Sometimes she said it from inside my head. "Let me out." I began to answer. "I will." It gave me purpose. John thought me improved because I became calmer. I smiled at breakfast. I submitted to tonics. I lay down at the appointed hours and did not argue when he spoke of Dr. Mitchell. I even told Jenny I was grateful for her care. Inside, I was planning. The paper was loose in several places. I had noticed that the pattern yielded more readily at night, especially under moonlight. By day, it clung. By night, it softened like flesh in warm water. I would wait until the last day, when John had gone to town and Jenny was busy packing. Then I would lock the door, throw the key down into the path, and tear it all away. The thought filled me with such fierce joy that I nearly sang. Still, the house resisted. The days before our departure grew heavy and strange. The garden became sinister. The roses browned at the edges, though it was still summer. The fountain water turned black and filmed over with iridescent scum. Once, looking from the barred window, I saw a woman creeping along the garden path in broad daylight. She crawled low and fast, keeping to the shadows of the box borders. Her hair dragged in the dirt. I called for Jenny. When she came, the path was empty. There, I said, pointing. She was there. Jenny looked not at the garden, but at me. Her face had become thin with worry. "You must fight it," she whispered. "Fight what?" She shut the window, though the room was hot. "You must not let the room take shape around you." That was a curious phrase. I asked what she meant, but she would not say. Later, I heard her crying in the linen closet. That night, John sat beside me until very late. He had brought a medical journal and turned pages without reading them. I could feel his watchfulness. It lay over me heavier than blankets. "John," I said softly. "Yes, dear. Was there a woman here before me?" He closed the journal. "There have been many tenants. One who died." His jaw tightened. "You have been listening at doors. Did she die in this room?" "No one died in this room." "You are lying." He stood then. For once, his patience cracked. "This morbid fixation is precisely why I forbid you to indulge in speculation. You are ill. You are not a detective, not a poet, not a tragic heroine. You are my wife, and you will obey me for your own sake." The words struck harder than shouting would have. My wife, obey, own sake. I looked at him, at his fine forehead, his clean hands, his respectable grief over my disobedience, and I wondered whether the woman in the wall had once loved the man who closed her in. "I want my baby," I said. His expression softened again, which was almost worse. "When you are stronger, I am his mother. You are not yourself. Then who am I?" He did not answer. After he slept, I rose and went to the wallpaper. The moon was nearly full. The woman was waiting. She pressed both palms against the pattern from the other side. I placed mine over them. The paper between us was warm. "Who am I?" I whispered. Her mouth stretched behind the yellow bars. "Almost us," she said. I did not sleep after that. The final day came hot and airless. John went to town after breakfast, promising to return by evening. He told me to rest. He kissed me. His beard brushed my cheek. "You are doing better," he said. "Only a little longer." "Yes," I said, "only a little longer." Jenny spent the morning packing linens and supervising Mary. I watched her from the doorway with a sweetness that frightened even me. She asked if I wanted to come downstairs. "No," I said, "I want to sleep." She smiled with relief. Once she was gone, I locked the nursery door and pocketed the key. Then I looked around the room. It had waited for me. The sunlight was bright, but the wallpaper seemed already moonlit, the pattern raised and twitching. The yellow smell billowed. It filled my lungs. It slid under my nails. The bed squatted in the center of the floor, nailed down, massive and obscene, its posts scarred with old bite marks. The barred windows threw shadows like prison stripes. I began at the largest torn place, near the head of the bed. The paper came away with a wet sound. Not dry, wet. It peeled in long strips, and the underside was darker, veined, membranous. I gagged, but kept pulling. Beneath the paper was not plaster, not in the places where the pattern had been strongest. Beneath it was a slick yellow surface that trembled when touched. Lines ran through it like capillaries. In one place, something pulsed. I tore harder. A hand burst through. It struck my face, leaving slime across my cheek. I fell back, then laughed. I do not know why. I laughed and seized the hand and pulled. The fingers clenched around mine with terrible strength. The wall bulged outward. A face pressed through the opening, flattened and distorted, mouth stretched wide, eyes sealed shut with yellow paste. "Help me," it whispered. I pulled. The skin of the wall tore around her shoulders. There was no blood, only a thick amber fluid that stank of mold and old medicine. She slid partly out, then stuck at the ribs. Her bones cracked as if being unfolded. Behind her, other faces pushed forward, layered upon one another like reflections in bad glass. I screamed with effort. The woman screamed with me, though her throat made almost no sound. I planted my feet against the bed frame and pulled until my arms felt as though they would leave their sockets. Then she came free. She collapsed onto the floor in a heap, long and white and terrible, wrapped in tatters of wallpaper that clung to her like afterbirth. Her hair covered her face. Her limbs were bent from years of crawling. Her back was ridged with the imprint of the pattern. When she lifted her head, I saw that she had no single face. Features shifted there. A young woman, an older one, a stranger, myself. All melted together, all looking from the same bruised eyes. She smiled. Her gums were dark. Many teeth were missing. "More," she said. The walls began to shake. Hands emerged everywhere. Fingers poked through seams. Nails scratched. Palms slapped from behind the paper in frantic rhythm. I tore and tore. The wallpaper came down in sheets. With every strip, more of them appeared, pressed beneath, flattened, gasping, their mouths full of yellow pulp. Some were only arms. Some were faces with no bodies. Some slid out whole, but horribly altered, limbs lengthened, joints reversed, ribs showing through translucent skin. They crawled past me and circled the room, rubbing themselves against the bare patches, as if remembering sensation. The sound was beyond description. Scraping nails, wet tearing, soft sobbing, laughter like paper crumpling. My own breath came in great animal gulps. My hands bled. My nails split. Still I tore. Outside, Jenny knocked. "Dear, are you sleeping?" I froze. The women froze with me. One hung halfway from the wall, her head lolling. Another crouched atop the wardrobe. A third had crawled beneath the bed and peered out with eyes like candle flames. The first woman, the one I had freed, placed one finger over her ruined mouth. Jenny knocked again. I thought I heard something. "Do not come in," I called. My voice was bright, almost merry. "I am resting." There was a pause. "Open the door, dear." "I cannot." "Why not?" "The key is in the garden." Silence. Then footsteps hurried away. I laughed again, and the women laughed with me. We worked faster. By late afternoon, the room was nearly stripped. The yellow paper lay in heaps, twitching faintly like shed skins. The exposed walls were not walls anymore, but a stained, porous membrane covered in impressions of bodies. Here a cheek, there a hand. There the outline of a woman curled around an invisible child. In the corner behind the bed, I found a patch that would not tear. It resisted every effort. The first woman hissed and pointed. "There," she said, "there." I braced myself and dug my fingers under the edge. It was stuck fast. I bit it. The taste flooded my mouth. Bitter medicine, dust, sweat, blood, milk gone sour, tears. I bit deeper. Something beneath the paper moaned. I pulled with my teeth and hands together until the strip ripped free. Behind it was a cavity. Inside lay journals, dozens of them. Some bound in leather, some stitched with thread, some only bundles of loose pages tied in ribbon. They were damp, but legible in places. I saw lines of handwriting, each different, each desperate. "My husband says rest." "They took my pencils." "The baby does not know my face." "The paper moves." "There is a woman behind it." "I am behind it." At the bottom of the cavity lay something smaller, wrapped in a christening gown stiff with age. My heart clenched. I reached in and drew it out. It was not a child. It was a mass of hair, teeth, and finger bones, tied with yellow ribbon. The first woman began to weep. I understood then that not all had come out whole. Some had been digested by the room. Some had become the pattern. Some remained only in fragments, preserved like relics in the wall that had eaten them. The horror of it should have broken me. Instead, it cleared me. All my life I had been told that my perceptions were unreliable, my feelings excessive, my thoughts dangerous. Yet here was proof, a cathedral of proof built from suffering and hidden in the walls. The terror was real. The cruelty was real. The paper had not invented my madness. It had recorded theirs, and John knew enough to be afraid. I gathered the journals and hid them beneath the bed. Then I returned to tearing. The sun began to sink. The room reddened. Shadows lengthened through the bars. The women crept faster as darkness approached. Some circled the walls, following the old scratched path around and around, their shoulders rubbing the plaster. Others clustered at the windows, pressing their faces between the bars and sniffing the evening air. One climbed the door and hung there like an insect, listening to the house. At last, John came. I heard the carriage outside, heard voices, Jenny frantic, John commanding, feet on the stairs. He knocked once. "Open the door, my darling." I was on my knees in the middle of the room, tearing the last strip near the floor. My dress was stained yellow. My hair had come loose. My hands were raw. "I cannot," I said pleasantly. "The key is down by the front steps, under a plantain leaf." "What did you say?" "The key is in the garden, John dear." Jenny made a small sound, almost a sob. John went away. I heard him descend, then return. The women drew close to me. Their bodies smelled of damp earth and old paper. One touched my hair with the tenderness of a sister. Another licked blood from my knuckles. Her tongue was cold. The key turned. The door opened. John stepped in. I shall never forget his face. At first he saw only me. His expression was stern, ready with reproach. Then he saw the walls. He saw the heaps of torn paper. He saw the exposed membrane poolsing in the corners. He saw the women. They did not rush him. That would have been too simple. They turned toward him slowly, one by one, like flowers turning toward the sun. Jenny screamed from the hall. John's medical bag slipped from his hand. "What is this?" he whispered. I rose, though my knees shook. "You tell me, John. You are the physician." A woman crawled from behind the door and sniffed his shoe. Another descended from the wardrobe, limbs cracking. The first woman stood beside me. She was taller now, straighter, though still hideous. Her face shifted until, for a moment, it resembled the woman from the journal scrap. John backed away. "This is not real," he said. "How comforting," I replied. "That always helped me so much." He looked at me then, truly looked. Not as a patient, not as a wife, as someone standing in a room with him while the world he trusted split open. "My dear," he said, "come away. From them, from this. This is where you put me." His lips trembled. "I tried to save you." "No," I said. "You tried to quiet me." The women began to whisper. At first, I could not distinguish the words. Then they joined into one phrase. "Quiet him, quiet him, quiet him." John clapped his hands over his ears. Jenny tried to pull him from the doorway, but he shook her off. Pride, even then. Authority, even then. He stepped toward me with his hands out, as though he might seize me and carry me bodily back into the world where he was sane and I was not. The first woman moved. She did not leap. She unfolded. Her arm extended too far, long as a branch, fingers spreading. She touched John's cheek. He went rigid. Every woman in the room opened her mouth. They breathed in. John gasped. His skin grayed. His eyes widened. I saw something leave him, not soul perhaps, but certainty. It poured from him in a pale vapor, and the women drank it. His knees buckled. He made a small, astonished sound, the sort a man might make on discovering that pain applies to him also. Then he fainted, right across my path. I looked down at him, my dear husband, my physician, my jailer, lying white and helpless among the ruins of the wallpaper. I ought to have felt triumph. I felt only a tired, distant pity. The women recoiled from him as if he were spoiled meat. They had taken what they wanted, not his life, not yet, something more delicate. Jenny was crying openly now. Please, she said to me, please come out. But I could not yet. The pattern was not entirely gone. There remained one strip behind the bed, where the headboard had protected it. The nailed bed would not move. John had refused to move it before, and now it stood like the final stubborn fact of him. I laughed softly and crawled over his body. My skirts brushed his face. His eyelids fluttered. I took hold of the bed frame and pulled. It did not move. The women gathered. All of them placed their hands upon it. Their fingers overlapped mine. Together we pulled. The nails screamed from the floor. The bed shifted. Dust rose. Beneath it, the last strip of wallpaper gleamed, untouched and bright as fresh bile. There, trapped behind it, was a face. My face, not the shifting face of the first woman. Mine exactly. Pale, wide-eyed, mouth open in a silent cry. It stared at me from behind the paper, flattened there, waiting to replace me. For the first time that day, I was afraid not of the room, not of John, not of the women, but of myself. I saw what would happen if I finished. The woman behind the paper would come out, and perhaps I would go in. Perhaps that was the way of it. Freedom paid for by succession. One released, one trapped. A pattern of inheritance more ancient than wallpaper. My double pressed her palms against the yellow surface. Let me out, she mouthed. The other women watched. I stepped back. No, I whispered. Their heads turned toward me. The first woman's expression softened with something like sorrow. There must be one, she said. Why, to hold the shape. I looked at the walls. Without the paper, they sagged inward. The room groaned. The corners had begun to darken, not with shadow, but with depth. Beyond the walls I glimpsed movement, a vast crawling multitude. Not just the women of this house. More. A world beneath the world, crowded with all who had been silenced, pressing upward through plaster, through law, through marriage beds, through nursery walls. The house needed a skin. The pattern needed a prisoner. John stirred on the floor. Jenny whispered my name. The baby cried downstairs. That cry went through me like a needle. I thought of his little fingers, his milky breath, his soft head tucked against Mary's shoulder. I thought of him growing in a world that would teach him to speak over women unless someone tore the lesson out by its roots. I thought of the journals hidden beneath the bed, the evidence, the voices. If I went into the wall, they might be lost again. If my double came out, wearing my face, would she mother him? Would she write? Would she burn the house? Or would she only continue the pattern in another form? I looked at the first woman. I will not take her place. The room shuddered. The women hissed, some in anger, some in fear. There must be one, the first woman repeated. But now she sounded uncertain. No, I said. My voice grew stronger. That is what they told us, that there must be one. One woman quiet, one woman sacrificed, one woman behind the paper so others may keep their rooms pretty. The face behind the strip twisted. I seized the last paper and tore it down. My double fell out. She landed at my feet, gasping. She was wet and thin and new, but she was not monstrous. She was only me as I might have become if I had stopped resisting. She reached for my hand. I helped her stand. The room screamed. The sound burst from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The exposed membrane split. Yellow fluid poured down in sheets. The barred windows rattled. Downstairs, glass shattered. Jenny fell to her knees in the hall. John woke and began to crawl blindly toward the door. The women scattered, shrieking. Some tried to climb back into the walls, but there was no pattern left to hold them. Others flung themselves at the windows, bending the bars outward with impossible strength. The first woman stood in the center of the room and laughed, a terrible, joyous sound that made the ceiling crack. I grabbed the journals from beneath the bed. My double grabbed John's medical bag. Together, we stepped over him. Move, I told him. He looked up at me. His eyes were empty of command. He moved. Jenny reached for me as I entered the hall. What have you done? She cried. What should have been done before? Behind us, the nursery convulsed. The women poured out. They did not all remain visible. Some became gusts of yellow dust. Some became whispers. Some crawled along the ceiling and vanished into cracks. Some ran upright down the corridor, their laughter trailing behind them. Mary met us at the stairs with the baby in her arms. Her face went white when she saw my double. To her credit, she did not scream. She only held the baby tighter. Give him to me, I said. She hesitated. Give him. She placed him in my arms. The moment I held him, the house seemed to inhale. For one dreadful second, I feared it wanted him too. But he opened his eyes and looked at me with calm infant seriousness, and the darkness in the stairwell drew back. We fled. The garden was alive with shadows. The roses thrashed, though there was no wind. The fountain overflowed with yellow water. Behind us, the house groaned and settled, its windows blazing with moonlight, though the moon had not yet risen. Women moved behind every pane, not trapped now, but watching. The nursery window burst outward. Iron bars fell into the shrubs. John stumbled after us, supported by Jenny. He seemed old. His fine certainty had drained away, leaving a man smaller than I remembered. My double walked beside me carrying the medical bag. Her bare feet left wet yellow marks on the path. At the gate, I turned back. The house had changed. Its white facade was streaked with yellow from roof to foundation, as if something inside had bled through. The upper room yawned open, dark and ragged. In that darkness stood the first woman. She lifted one hand. I lifted mine. Then the house folded inward, not collapsed, not as houses do when beams fail and roofs fall. It folded softly, like paper being crumpled by an unseen fist. The walls bent. The chimneys snapped. The windows squeezed shut. There was a long sigh, a release of dust, and the mansion sank into itself until only a mound of broken timber, plaster, and yellow scraps remained. No one spoke for a long time. At dawn, men from the village came. John, recovering somewhat, tried to explain a structural failure. Rot in the beams, fumes perhaps, some extraordinary combination of natural causes. He spoke uncertainly, and no one believed him entirely. Jenny said nothing. Mary said nothing. My double had disappeared before sunrise, taking John's medical bag with her. Sometimes I think she was never separate from me. Sometimes I think she walks still, carrying instruments meant to measure and restrain, using them now to cut women free. The journals survived. I made certain of that. John wanted to burn them, not with the old authority, but with fear. He said no good could come from stirring up such horrors. He said people would misunderstand. He said my health would suffer. I laughed in his face. It was not a kind laugh. I do not regret it. We did not go to Dr. Mitchell in the autumn. I refused, and for once my refusal stood. Perhaps John no longer trusted his own judgment. Perhaps he feared what else might come crawling from walls if he pressed too hard. We moved to a smaller house, one with plain white plaster and no wallpaper. I kept my baby near me. I wrote every day. John and I were never again as we had been. How could we be? He still loved me, I think, in the only way he knew how, but he had seen the architecture of that love stripped bare. He had seen that a cage may be built from concern as surely as from iron. Sometimes he tried to speak of the summer, but the words failed him. Sometimes I woke and found him standing before a blank wall, touching it with trembling fingers. Jenny changed too. She read the journals with me. She wept over them. She confessed that she had heard stories of the room, not all, but enough, and had let John persuade her that silence was kindness. Afterward, she never again told me to rest when I wished to speak. As for the wallpaper, small scraps of it remained in the journals, stuck between pages, clinging to old ink. I should have destroyed them. I know that. Instead, I kept one piece sealed in a glass jar. It is on my desk as I write this. By daylight, it is only ugly. A scrap of faded yellow paper with a fragment of senseless pattern. But at night, when the house is quiet and my child sleeps in the next room, it stirs, just a little. The lines shift. The curves tighten. Sometimes I smell that old yellow smell, faint as memory. Sometimes I hear fingernails far away, scratching patiently. I do not fear it as I once did, but I do not trust it. Last night, under the moon, I saw a new shape behind the pattern. Not a woman this time, a hand. A man's hand, broad and pale, pressing outward from the other side. It wore a wedding ring. It tapped the glass once, then again, as if asking to be let out. I sat there until dawn with my pen in my hand, watching it. I thought of John asleep upstairs, older now, gentler perhaps, but still John. I thought of all the rooms in all the houses where someone is told not to write, not to think, not to feel, not to speak of the thing that moves behind the pattern. The tapping continued. At sunrise, it stopped, and now my tale is nearly done. You may tell yourself it was madness. That would be the comfortable ending. You may say the woman in the wallpaper was only a symbol, the house only a house, my terror only the fevered invention of a nervous mind. People like John have always depended on such explanations. They are tidy. They are safe. They allow the walls to remain standing. But tonight, before you sleep, look closely at the room around you. Look at the wallpaper if there is any. Look at the curtains, the cracks, the repeating grain of wood, the shadows where one shape becomes another if watched too long. Ask yourself whether every pattern in your life was chosen by you. Ask yourself who benefits when you call your own eyes unreliable. Ask yourself how many voices have been pressed flat behind the surfaces of ordinary things. And if, in the dark, you hear a soft scraping from the wall, do not call at once for a doctor. Listen first. It may be someone asking to be freed. It may be someone asking to take your place. Thank you for listening to this dreadful confession. Please subscribe and like the video for more. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of